Hello, my name is Carolina Bouldin. I was placed in a 6th grade language arts classroom at Skyline Middle School. The curriculum requirement for the particular lesson that I taught was pre-writing for a concept definition essay. The primary SOL standard used was SOL 6.7b, using a variety of pre-writing strategies, including graphic organizers to generate and organize ideas. The following are several clips from my lesson. Each particular clip will show how I use differentiation within my lesson to accommodate my students. This is the first clip, a Write What You Know group project. Watch the following. I want you all to write anything and everything you know about writing an essay. So don't write an essay, I just want you to write down what you have learned about writing essays. Any rules you've learned in school, anything you've learned from experience, just anything at all. And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you guys to speak, and I'll explain from there. But I want you to write as much as you can think of as a group. I want you to talk with your group. I want you to look at them and be a part of the family, okay? We're not orphans here. The differentiation type here is environment. The characteristic is student readiness. The strategy is heterogeneous grouping. According to Ben Johnson's article on homogeneous versus heterogeneous grouping, if the purpose of a learning activity is to help struggling students, then heterogeneous grouping is the most effective method. In this core class, I observed several students struggling to understand very basic instructions during class, such as write 3 qualities about the main character. Instead of obeying those instructions, these students would wait until I or the other teacher was available and ask for the instructions to be explained again before they started. My intention in dividing students into heterogeneous groups was to help these particular students be more productive by having their peers who understand the instructions readily available to help explain them to the struggling students. Strengths. The strength of heterogeneous grouping is that the struggling students are in the loop and on task during the lesson. Weaknesses. The weakness of this type of differentiation is that the on-grade level and above grade level students had to spend much of the class assisting their peers and soon grew bored with the lesson. One gifted student in particular expressed her lack of motivation to me during the lesson, which set a negative tone for the rest of her group. This next video clip is an example of what I call brain dump, in which students free write for several minutes without looking up, and they write down all of their ideas. We're going to write about that, and we have to include why it's important. So we're going to start the timer for 4 minutes. We're going to just write, not look at each other, not talking. We're just going to write. I don't want to set the timer up there because I want them to see it. In a moment, you will see how I differentiate for one ELL student who struggles to understand the vocabulary word that we are talking about, wisdom. Watch the following clip to understand how I address this. I know you're still a little confused, but write down maybe just an experience where you feel like you've learned something. Does that make sense? Ivan, does that make sense? Write down an experience where you've learned something. Don't just write anything. This is just to get ideas down. You're not going to get a bad grade. The differentiation type was product, based on student readiness. The strategy was menu of options. My rationale is because this student struggled to understand the vocabulary word, wisdom, and still did not grasp the concept even after I'd worked with him individually earlier in the lesson, I decided to alter the product to meet his needs. Instead of writing an anecdote about wisdom in particular, I had him write bullet points about any time he had learned something new. In this way, he was able to still participate in the pre-writing exercise in a meaningful way, but in a way that best suited his language abilities. We would later use his notes about learning to help him understand that the knowledge he had acquired was, in fact, wisdom. The strengths of this is that the student was able to participate in the assignment even though he was unable to fully grasp the word wisdom itself in that moment. He required a different didactic process on my part and a modified product on his part in order to participate. The weakness of this approach is that several of my students were neglected as a result of my time being used up working with this particular student. The other students were okay, but because I had spent so long working with this one particular student, the other students were not able to have their needs met as well. My last example is a menu of options differentiating the product based on learner profile, as you will see in a moment.
Has anyone ever seen something like this before? Have you ever seen a graphic organizer? Have you ever used any kind of graphic organizer before? Yeah? Okay. Can someone tell me what a graphic organizer is, what it does? You raise your hand. Todd? You can use one to compare things, yes. Anyone else? Jamin? Yeah, it organizes your paragraphs in your story. So see, earlier we talked about, oh, there we go. But what I have done, I also put some note cards there, and if you prefer to touch, and if you prefer, instead of like drawing and writing, if you prefer to like mess around with note cards, that's totally okay. That's why I put some note cards over there. You can write down your ideas. So for mine, I have, you cannot see this very well at all.
During my time in the classroom, I observed that several students responded differently to my CT's lessons. Although a lot of the lessons were taught verbally, appealing to auditory learners, it appeared that many students responded better to visual aids that my CT put on the projector, or to have something to touch and move around. I wanted to ensure that my students could have more than one option for organizing their thoughts as they gathered ideas for their essays. By providing the graphic organizers, visual learners could have a more effective way to organize their thoughts for the essay. By providing the note cards, students could write their thoughts down on individual parts and then rearrange them as they developed their essay, thus appealing to the kinesthetic learners. The strength of this type of differentiation is that students had two alternatives, in addition to my verbal instructions and modeled examples on the screen, as to how they might organize their thoughts. They are given the choice whether they want to use one method over the other, based on their learner profile. The weakness of this is that some students were confused by my modeled examples and thought they had to use both, which frustrated them and caused them to give up too quickly. That is the conclusion of my video reflection assignment. Thank you for watching. It was a pleasure learning about differentiation within the classroom firsthand. Goodbye for now.